My name is Trevor McFarlane. I'm the Research Director at Gulfstat for the Middle East and Africa. First of all, I'd just like to invite the Honourable Peter Walsh up to make his speech, and then each time the Minister will take a seat and then we will have a panel discussion. While Peter is making his way up, I'll just tell you a little bit about the Minister. Before entering Parliament in November 2002, Peter Walsh, who has his own green fingers because I believe he has on-the-ground experience from operating an irrigated horticultural enterprise which produced a whole slew of different vegetables. So he has his own experience from policy making and on the ground as well. Please, Minister, thank you.
Thank you very much, Trevor, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to be here at the World Food Security Summit, a critical forum for addressing the region's food needs. Victoria, State of Australia, and the United Arab Emirates have a strong trading relationship, and especially when it comes to food and agricultural products. The UAE is Victoria's fifth largest export market for food and agriculture, and the wider region is actually our second biggest market after China. Australia produces enough food to feed between 60 and 80 million people, but with a population of only 22 million people, we are obviously a net exporter. And Victoria is Australia's largest agricultural state, producing and exporting more food than any other Australian state of just 3% of our arable land mass. For example, while we produce 66% of Australia's dairy product, we account for 86% of Australia's dairy exports. And to increase food supply, it's about a government working together with industry to develop world-class, internationally competitive production systems and establishing strong relationships throughout the regions. The food we produce in Victoria is clean and green, and thanks to our temperate climate, quality soil types and first-class irrigation infrastructure. Our food and agricultural workforce, from our farmers and growers to our processors and packers, have a reputation for embracing new technology and finding more productive ways of doing things. Victoria is also Australia's freight and logistic capital and home to the country's most critical port export infrastructure. As personal incomes and populations increase throughout the world, consumers are increasingly demanding the products that Victoria specialises in. These are premium, safe food, especially high-quality dairy, red meat, grains, fruit and beverages. And these are Victoria's agriculture and food processing strengths. The Victorian Government is committed to playing a greater role in supplying food to the region, and we are doing this in two ways. On the supply side, we are investing in research and development and managing our natural resources with an aim of doubling production by 2030. On the demand side, we are creating opportunities for Victorian businesses and helping them connect to markets throughout the Middle East and Asia, and importantly to meet the specific needs of those markets. Each of these endeavours is a partnership between government and industry. The Victorian Government doesn't actually export, but we can invest in critical infrastructure, in research and innovation, and in the skills of our workforce to create new opportunities for our exporting businesses. To achieve the goal of doubling production by 2030, Victoria is fortunate to have decades of investment in scientific research and innovation that has actually delivered productivity gains in the past. For example, in just the last 3 decades, Victoria's researchers have created a national canola industry valued over $2 billion to Australia in 12-13, principally by breeding blackleg-resistant varieties that have enabled that industry to develop. Victoria's expertise has also been seen in dairy industry doubling its production over the last 30 years from the same number of cows, actually on less land. Better genetics, pasture utilisation and supplementary feeding have driven this significant achievement. Critical to our goal of doubling production by 2030 will be the continued investment in science and its application on farms. We have boosted our scientific research capacity by opening what's called AgriBio, a $288 million state-of-the-art facility which is bringing 400 of Australia's and the world's best scientists under the one roof to work on future productivity improvements. We have worked hard to ensure that our food producers have access to reliable and secure water supplies. This is critical for Victoria, as irrigated agriculture accounts for 38% of our agricultural output. We have therefore invested heavily in modernising irrigation infrastructure and in on-farm water efficiency programs. With the Australian Government, we have invested $2 billion Australian in our Murray Goulburn Food Bowl to secure its long-term water supply. This project utilises the latest technology to automate the main irrigation channels and monitor flows 24 hours a day and to minimise the amount of water lost through leakage and evaporation. We are also investing in critical infrastructure to ensure we're up to the increasing freight task. Victoria may already be Australia's trade gateway to the world, but to feed the region we need to know and invest in more export capacity. That's why we are expanding our future port capacity by committing significant funding to developing another major port in Victoria, the Port of Hastings. This will double the current capacity of the Port of Melbourne and ensure that we have our production output increases, being able to move to the world markets. To link with those markets, we have a comprehensive trade mission program, which is what brought myself and 110 Victorian businesses here to Dubai to Gulf Foods. Since December 2010, the Victorian government has supported 2,642 companies to participate in 65 trade missions to 31 countries. We estimate these trade missions will generate over $4 billion Australian in export sales. We find that our smaller food and agricultural businesses lack the scale or the expertise to build new relationships and understand how to do business in different markets. Victoria's bigger businesses are actually already doing this. Take Murray Goulburn, for example, Australia's biggest dairy cooperative. It set up in Dubai last year, and I had the pleasure of opening that office while we're here at Gulf Foods. But the smaller companies face greater challenges. By taking groups, sometimes small, targeted groups, sometimes large like this trade mission, we are bridging the gap between ways of doing business and between oceans. We recognise that it is personal relationships that underpin strong trading relationships. Such an example is the Victorian company Baby Royale, who have been visiting Gulf Foods in the Middle East for a number of years and now close to securing securing a $4 million deal with a major retailer following the visit last year. Victoria also regularly hosts delegations into the state. We are doing this next week, bringing more than 240 Asian buyers to Melbourne. We have also done this with Middle Eastern companies in the past, usually later in the calendar year. We also work hard to share market insights we collect with our businesses so that they can tailor products and packaging accordingly. For the Middle Eastern market, this is especially important for the export of halal products and for ensuring we adhere to labelling requirements. Our market position in the Middle East and beyond is underpinned by our world-class safety and biosecurity systems. Victoria's food safety regulators are systematic and rigorous. Dairy Food Safety Victoria regulates Victoria's dairy industry, which accounts for, as I said, 86% of the total exports from Australia. PrimeSafe regulates our meat to Australia as well as to international Codex standards. We are also fortunate to be free of many agricultural pests and diseases that affect other countries, and we do our best to ensure our customers throughout the region understand the integrity of our production and export systems. This is the truly basis of our green reputation. Victoria's trade with the UAE and the Middle East North African region in general has been strong, and we look forward to the opportunities to increase that into the future. The food we produce in Victoria is clean and green, and thanks to our temperate climate, quality soil types and world-class infrastructure. So we look forward to being a key part of supplying your food into the future. Thank you.
Minister Walsh, thank you very much. It was very interesting to see the magnitude of Australia and indeed the importance for long-term food security supply. Now what we're going to do is introduce the Canadian Minister, Lyle Stewart, and if he could join us on stage. Thank you very much. Minister Lyle Stewart is Saskatchewan Minister for Agriculture in the province of Canada, and he has been serving the people of Saskatchewan since 1999 when he was elected to the Legislative Assembly as the MLA for Thunder Creek. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to this summit and to this beautiful, beautiful city. We have traveled a long distance from Canada to be here, but it's well worth it for us to see what United Arab Emirates has to offer, and to meet some wonderful people here, and to see the show, and last but not least, to escape a week or so of our winter. I want to talk a little about the province of Saskatchewan and how we can play a role in food security throughout the world. In Canada and Saskatchewan, we are good at a number of things, hockey and curling. In fact, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our curling teams have both won gold at Winter Olympics, and our men's hockey team will be playing for gold later today. But our strength has always been and continues to be agriculture. We are blessed with abundant natural resources and leading-edge innovation that helps us produce safe, healthy agriculture products. Our province has 18.2 million hectares of cultivated farmland, which is 42% of Canada's total cultivated acres, and is home to 37,000 large farms. In fact, we are Canada's largest grain, oilseed, and pulse producing province. Even on the global stage, Saskatchewan is a leader in the export of lentils, peas, wheat, canola, and canola oil. Saskatchewan agriculture exports to the United Arab Emirates in 2013 or 2012 were more than $260 million. Saskatchewan accounts for 95% of Canada's lentil exports and 49% of total world exports. At the same time, our province accounted for 83% of Canada's durum wheat exports and 37% of the world's exports. In total, last year, our province exported $11.7 billion worth of agricultural products. I don't want to bore you any longer with stats, but in Saskatchewan, agriculture is big business, and we take it very seriously. With our enormous productive capacity, Saskatchewan is committed to partnering with our customers to meet their food security needs now and in the future. We would not be the agricultural production leader that we are today without research. Innovation and research in Saskatchewan's ag sector is driven by strong collaboration amongst all segments of the industry. We are home to 1/3 of all agricultural biotech research in Canada and many world-class research facilities. The University of Saskatchewan is a leader in agricultural crop research and is home to one of Canada's largest clusters of research organizations. This includes the Crop Development Centre, which has been responsible for the release of over 400 new commercial crop varieties. We have many other important research institutions, but one I want to touch on briefly is the Global Institute for Food Security, which was officially established in 2012 in the province. This institute is a partnership between government, the University of Saskatchewan, and the private sector. Its ultimate goal is to develop solutions to feed a growing world population. This is the very reason we are all together here today. The research generated there will enable innovative, multidisciplinary research, training, and technology development to improve sustainable crop production and enhance human and animal nutrition. It will build on Saskatchewan's existing strength in crop production systems and through new investments in technological, economic, nutritional, and environmental improvements to the food safety system. The Institute will take a strategic approach, for example, breeding for higher yield, improved nutrition, and better processing traits. Will serve as a catalyst for scientific collaboration between Saskatchewan and partner countries to advance global food security. I would invite all of you here to consider partnering with us in this institute. Food security has no borders, and we're all working towards the same goal. Therefore, we would welcome any investment in the institute to help us collectively address this important issue. We need to focus on these types of research initiatives simply to ensure our producers have the capacity to grow healthier food in greater quantities. During the 1970s and 80s, traditional cultivation practices were used in Saskatchewan and led to serious soil erosion and the loss of our topsoil. Saskatchewan, through research, was a leader then in the development of zero-till or conservation tilling practices and the development of zero-till seeding revolutionized the way that we farm. This technology reversed the loss of our topsoil, to the point that Saskatchewan soils are now a carbon sink, helping address climate change. It helps us conserve moisture and is a fundamental reason why we are producing record crops and ever continuing larger crops in Saskatchewan and throughout Canada. In addition, the development of lentils and canola has changed agriculture in our province. Not long ago, we didn't know what a lentil seed was. Not part of our diet, not something that we ever produced before 35 years ago. And we were still producing a crop called rapeseed, not canola. Thanks to research and lentils done on lentils and canola done in Saskatchewan, our province is now a world leader in production and export of both of these crops. More importantly, these healthy products are now staples in the human diet around the world. These examples demonstrate the power of research and innovation and how important it is to food security. This brings me to my next point, which is the importance of science-based regulation. I think we can all agree in this room that global food security is dependent on successful trade amongst countries. Trade rules help ensure that agriculture goods can move quickly around the globe to feed our people. Science-based rules are necessary to ensure that we are not limited in the tools we use to attain global food security as our populations grow. They also ensure that there are no unnecessary barriers in place, regardless of where food comes from and to those who need it most. In order to ensure these tools are available to address food security, we need to establish reasonable low-level presence policies to address the inevitable inclusion of GMOs. I know this is a hot topic for many of us, and GMOs are just one example of many trade-distorting policies that exist throughout the world. Policies that restrict the movement of proven safe goods are misguided and only limit the capacity we have to feed the people of the world. We need to cross these barriers if we are serious about food security. As the world's population increases at a rate of approximately 200,000 people per day, or 70 million per year, this is as important an issue as any. With population projected to reach 9 billion by the year 2050, we will need all of the science-based tools at our disposal to feed a hungry world. In closing, I want to reiterate that Canada, and particularly Saskatchewan, is ideally suited to play a leading role in addressing food security. We are focused on producing bigger and healthier crops to meet the demand from across the globe. We will continue to invest in research to ensure that we can achieve our goals. As world leaders in food production and security, it is vital that we in this room take this opportunity to discuss these issues and work collaboratively towards solutions. I appreciate the partnerships we have made and look forward to developing and growing these relationships in the future. Together, there is much we can accomplish. Once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I hope that you'll all enjoy the rest of the presentations and the summit. Thank you.
Minister Stewart, thank you very much. I think when we hear those population growth figures, it puts the importance of this summit into play. Now we're going to have George Eustice from the UK, who is the minister there, if you wouldn't mind joining us on stage. George has been the Conservative MP for Camborne and Redruth in Cornwall since 2010. And he also, similar to Minister Walsh, has green fingers in the sense that he came from a farming background, and his family still run a fruit farm, restaurant and farm shop in Cornwall, which sounds delightful. Thank you very much, Minister.
Well, thank you very much. And as you say, I spent about 10 years in the farming industry myself, so I have a great deal of interest in this particular topic. But as the British representative here, I thought it might be useful to begin by just putting a little bit of historical perspective on this very important debate about global food security. Because in Britain, in the 18th century, we had a cleric and a scholar called Thomas Malthus, who many of you may have heard of, most of you probably won't. but he developed the theory of what was called the Malthusian catastrophe. And in the late 1700s, he predicted that rising population in the absence of increased agricultural production, because land was a limited resource, meant that there would be widespread famine. And he predicted huge doom and gloom at that time. But two things happened around that time. First of all, we had the agricultural revolution, and there was a huge leap forward in agricultural production in Britain. And the second thing that happened shortly after is that there was a liberalization of trade around the world, and some laws which are called the Corn Laws, which put heavy taxes on imported cereals into England and into Britain, were actually removed, and that freed up trade and helped to ensure we could feed our population. And it's very interesting, I think, that this topic's now come round again. The UK government takes this incredibly seriously. In 2011, we commissioned something called the Foresight Report, which looked in detail at the modern-day issue of food security. And it brought together around 400 leading experts from 35 countries to look at this challenge of how we feed a growing world population. The population expected to go to 9 billion, and with food demand projected to rise by around 60% by 2050. Now, this morning, I've spent a lot of time at the Gulf Food Exhibition Centre. We've got over 100 British companies exhibiting there. I've seen some of the fine cheeses that we've got on offer, shortbread from Scotland, Welsh lamb, Cornish sea salt from my own part in the far southwest of England, and also a large number of manufacturers of catering equipment and refrigeration equipment. And all of them say that this Gulf Food exhibition has gone from strength to strength. Each year it's got bigger and stronger, and British exports to the UAE are actually up around 14% over the last year, now up to around £250 million a year. And this is key and something that we want to develop further. Now, the reason I raise this isn't just to shamelessly give a plug for British products to my audience here, good though those products are, but it's to make a very important point about one of the conclusions from that Foresight report we did, which is just as it was one of the solutions to the 18th century problem we had with food security, trade is one of the most important things we need to develop if we are to tackle global food insecurity. And it starts with having open and transparent markets. When you have price support mechanisms, export bans, tariffs, all of these things lead to greater volatility and undermine food security. So I think it's very important that all the nations around the world continually strive to free up markets and promote free trade, because that is one of the ways we will deliver food security. And it's why I think the Agricultural Market Information System that was promoted by the G20 in 2011 is so important, because it promotes transparency and can encourage the removal of barriers. There are a couple of other areas around food security, not linked necessarily to global food supply, but where we in the UK are doing some work. The first is around resilience of the food supply chain. We've done a lot of work with our suppliers and with retailers in the UK to map and forecast problems when you have, for instance, bad weather that affects farm yields and farm crops, or when you have some other crisis that can disrupt your distribution system. And we have a number of continuity, contingency plans that are in place to ensure we can react to those short-term problems in the supply chain. And we've also done a great deal of work to try to reduce waste in the supply chain. We've managed to cut waste in the supply chain by about 7% in recent years, and household food waste is down by around 15%. And I think there's a lot more that we could do in terms of technology to promote a reduction of waste, whether it's using controlled atmosphere cold storage to extend the life of certain crops that are in storage, or even smart packaging that actually controls the environment and can extend the shelf life of produce. There's a great deal more that we could do to develop work in these areas. But I want to move on to say a little bit about the second key conclusion of the Foresight report. One was we should promote global free trade. The second was that we need to drive forward farm productivity. And again, this was one of the solutions in England in the 18th century to the food security crisis that Thomas Malthus foresaw at that point. And I think that we can do a lot more in terms of precision farming, better use of resources, enhanced plant breeding. In Britain, we now have the Synthetic Biology Leadership Council, and there's real opportunities, I think, to make that next leap forward and have some of those new strains of plants which perhaps can survive on less water, can be higher yielding, and can help us meet the challenges that we face. And we also need to make sure, of course, that as we make that next leap forward in terms of farm productivity, that we also do not lose sight of the importance of sustainability, because agriculture uses around 70% of the global freshwater resources and accounts for around 30% of global warming gases. So as we intensify our agriculture and make that next leap forward in productivity, we must ensure that we do so in a sustainable way. Finally, I want to conclude by making a final point around the importance of skills. And as I said, I worked in the farming industry myself for 10 years. I went to agricultural college and studied horticulture. And I think it's incredibly important if we're going to meet the challenges of global food security, that we actually promote agriculture and horticulture as a worthwhile career to the young, talented people in universities around the world today. And in the UK, we're looking very closely at how we can promote new entrants coming into the industry, how we can help them fulfill their aspirations, because all successful industries need vibrant new talent coming into them. It's certainly what we're trying to achieve in the UK, and I'm sure it's what many other countries around the world are doing. But thank you very much for inviting me here again. I think that's probably all we'll do for some opening comments, and we can then go to some detailed discussions and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister Eustice. From Thomas Malthus to modern trade, to the importance of education, it was very insightful. Finally, I'd just like to invite the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Argentina, Hector Timerman. The Minister was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs in June 2010. And before that was the Ambassador for Argentina to the US. So brings a great wealth of diplomacy and political experience. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. It is a pleasure for me to participate in the opening session of this event and share with you some thoughts on so important a matter for the present and the future of mankind as food security. As many of you may already know, Argentina is a key food provider at world level. According to the FAO, Argentina figures among the world's top 10 countries by agricultural area, with some 345 million arable acres. Our country produces and exports food for more than 400 million people in 170 different countries. This position is explained not only by the abundance and the diversity of Argentina's natural resources, but also by the tremendous efforts made to raise the productivity standards of our agricultural sector. In the past decade, we have managed to increase grain production from 67 million tons to a historic record of 105 million tons. Since 2003, we have implemented a series of active policies aimed at increasing agricultural production in a sustainable manner, including social sustainability. Furthermore, we are committed to an agricultural productive development process that embraces new technologies and promotes the industrialization of the sector in a way that avoids job losses. One of the key aspects of the Argentine government's agri-food policy is that it encourages adding value at the place of origin of production, while promoting employment and inclusion, a value that is central to our 2020 National Agri-Food Plan, whose motto is industrializing the rural sector. Argentina is strongly committed to the fight against food insecurity. The responsibility that comes with having such an outstanding presence in the world food market has led us to take very clear stances on the need to put an end to hunger in the world and to the obstacles that impede the achievement of such a goal. We must be conscious that hunger in the world is, above all, a distribution problem. According to the latest FAO data, some 842 million people, around 1 in 8 of the world's population, suffer from chronic hunger as they lack sufficient food to lead an active and healthy lifestyle. This situation is not explained by a quantitative deficit in food production, since FAO estimates that the quantity of food produced is equivalent to 1.5 what is needed to satisfy the global population's demand. Furthermore, we are convinced, as we have always stated at the respective international fora, that regulating the price of food is not the right approach to fighting hunger. Any measure providing for an artificial decrease in the price of food would be extremely deleterious for small farmers of poor countries who, paradoxically, are the worst hit by hunger in the world. Instead, we need to regulate the functioning of the international financial system and of the large corporations that control the sale and distribution of food worldwide, which make extraordinary profits at the expense of farmers and the hunger of millions of people the world over. Thirdly, one could not talk about the phenomenon of food insecurity without mentioning its link to the inequalities of the multilateral trade system, a scheme severely distorted by the large subsidies granted by developed countries to their primary production. These subsidies are transferred to the end prices of foods, thus depressing prices, driving out the competition of exporters from developing countries, and adversely affecting the agricultural activity of the least developed countries. The Bible reminds us to us ancient Egypt as the land of plenty of grains, a country blessed by the Nile and the breadbasket of the Mediterranean Sea for centuries. Now, Egypt is reduced to net food importer, result of agro-protectionist practices of the developed world. To put it clearly, we understand that world hunger is a direct consequence of poverty, unfair wealth distribution, a concentrated and very heterogeneous production system among countries, the victory of financial speculation over productive activities, and a multilateral trade system completely distorted by abusive practices of developed countries that especially affect the countries of the world's poorest regions. We believe that in order to ensure food supply for the population, states must implement active policies that promote production, development, industrialization, and genuine job creation. Like our President, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, said 2 years ago at the G20, nobody can have food security without a job that allows access to it. Production, stimulation of consumption, and job creation have to do with returning to a true capitalism where production prevails over finance. Today, in contrast, we are experiencing a sort of anarchic capitalism or financial anarcho-capitalism. With this perspective in mind, Argentina has among its agricultural cooperation programs for Latin America, Africa, and Asia, projects that are based on associative approaches. These programs do not have the goal of creation of new markets, but essentially the transmissions of advanced agricultural technology to regions with lower standards of agricultural productivity. In short, we build food security, returning to the developing world the ability to recover their own food markets and allowing access of their products to supermarkets in rich countries. To this end, it is imperative to have a sincere commitment to technology transfer and the elimination of trade-distorting subsidies. It is also essential that international organizations take the responsibility that was assigned to them by the community of nations. The developing world will never get rid of the poverty trap and malnutrition without credits for roads, bridges, tractors, and agricultural schools. With no education and infrastructure, all incentive policies in agricultural production are absolutely useless. Moreover, allow me on this occasion retake an insistent claim of my country to the WTO. Recover the spirit with it was launched the Doha Development Round. And I underline the word development instead of to just working on free trade. At home, in Argentina, we also believe that the state should provide for different structural inclusion policies for the most vulnerable sectors, which, in addition to substantially improving social equality, shored up the domestic market and fed macroeconomic growth. During the last decade, Argentina diversified its production structure, thereby doubling industrial production, increased the value of its exports by threefold, and created over 5 million new jobs, provide retirement benefits to 2.5 million retirees more, and launched universal allowance for 3.5 million children, youth, and pregnant women. We believe that firm and determined adoption of this kind of inclusive social policies and a profound redefinition of economic relations at multilateral level are the key elements to overcome the structural hurdles that conspire against global food security. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Please, you bring up a very important point of the trade system and the impact this has, and that's something we should address on the panel. And before we jump into this, I'll just start with Minister Walsh because he was the first to speak. Minister Walsh, do you feel that globally policymakers are genuinely waking up to the idea of food security and the importance of a sustainable food security in the sense of partners dealing with each other more of a long-term basis?
Yes, I do. I think one of the great things about Gulf Foods, which is the biggest food expo in the world, is those sorts of discussions are happening. This conference is about those sorts of discussions again. So from our state in Australia's point of view, we see ourselves as a key part of supplying that food worldwide, and we have very productive discussions with the markets we work in. I think it is talked about regularly, and the first thing in any issue is actually identify you've got a problem and then start thinking about how you solve it, and that is being done. I'm a great believer that science and the innovation of our industries will make sure we can feed the world in the future.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's, from Minister Eustice, from your perspective, I thought it was a very interesting point where you bring up the importance of education, because all too often we talk about things from a G2G and the trade system perspective, but at a very fundamental basis, if we don't have the skills to actually develop this, we're going to have a shortfall. How do you see is the best way of working through that situation?
Well, I think a lot of it actually is about getting the status of farming as a career up the agenda. So what we're doing in the UK, for instance, we're doing some work at the moment with schools so that we can take bright young graduates who are maybe in their 20s, who've got a career in the food industry or the farming industry, to go into schools and actually explain to those teenagers who are 14, 15, about to make career choices, that actually this isn't the sort of straw in the mouth, old sort of perceptions that there might be about farming. It's actually a really modern industry, science-based industry with an exciting future. And I think the right people to do that are those who've just graduated from university and gone into these careers. And we're doing some work now to try to promote this as a career. And the other thing that we are doing is we've introduced a new degree at Sheffield University in the UK, which is looking at engineering in the food processing sector, specialising in engineering. So at the moment, our best engineers tend to go into aerospace and defence industries. And actually, if you look at modern food processing, whether it's dairy or whatever it is, you'll actually find there's some quite technical bits of equipment that are used in factories today. And so we're keen to get some of those engineers in the industry that way. So I think it's a combination of raising the status, promoting it in schools, and actually, once they go into a career as well, allowing them to fulfill their aspirations. So it's not just sort of doing a job, a 9-to-5 job, but actually they have an opportunity maybe to earn a stake in a farming business, have a share of the profits, really fulfill their aspirations, and getting some of those models right to attract new talent is really important, and we're looking at doing that.
And of course, an important part of that is the technology and teaching them the new innovations. And this is something that Canada and your province in particular has played a very important role, as you touched on in your speech. How do you help with that knowledge transfer?
Well, it starts in Saskatchewan at the public school level. We have a program to help young people in Saskatchewan understand that, as my counterpart just said, agriculture is a highly technological, a very advanced, environmentally friendly industry that has a large number of exciting career paths for young people, and of course we build on that with further training. We're doing something new to help our farmers who are large farmers and generally hire employees to bring people who may not be experienced on working in the agricultural industry into the industry as valuable employees, and teaching them the proper operation, calibration, and service of major farm equipment, and how to perform the most common functions that would make them useful on Saskatchewan farms. And so those are a few of the things, some of the things that we're doing to that end.
And Minister, finally, one of the most important points you made was the distortion in the trade markets. I thought that was a fascinating point. What's the best way to fix this, particularly with this friction between the developed and the developing world?
Well, thank you very much. Hello? Yes? Yes. Well, first of all, we think that the subsidies that are being applied in the most developed countries work against producing food in the less developed countries. So in that sense, you make it impossible to compete or to start a business, an agro business in countries in Africa, for instance, or Asia, who cannot compete with food produced in the developed world subsidized by the government. The other thing is about trade. We are seeing more and more countries who are applying trade restrictions. For instance, they apply environmental barriers. They apply health, well-being, animal well-being restrictions. And so sometimes for countries in the third world, or what we used to call the third world, less developed countries, they cannot even start thinking about competing with all this, because in a way, if the countries who can afford to buy food close their markets to the emerging countries, in a way, you are telling them to forget about producing food. But producing food is not only to have land. You also have, and my colleagues here have just said, you need technology. You need credit. You need roads. You need harbors to take out the food and to export the food. And all that things, the only way to obtain is through the financial system, through like credits from the World Bank or other regional banks, who are not usually available. There is a restriction on the credit. And so everything works against these countries to produce food. When they cannot produce food for themselves or to export, then they start importing food. And that is when you create this trade problem, that we are seeing. It is closing the markets and lack of credits and technology transfer.
Minister Eustice, is that something that you see happening? Would you agree with that thesis?
Well, I think and I made the point in my own opening remarks, that we should all do everything we can to promote free trade around the world, because that's certainly part of our solution. And especially in the UK, where we produce about 70% of the food we need, but we do rely on food imports for the remainder. I think there's always going to be quite a difficult dilemma when you have issues such as animal welfare, which is in Europe, it's something that we take very seriously. and we try to promote higher animal welfare standards than sometimes you get in other parts of the world. And it's quite difficult for our producers to say, we're going to expose you to competition from production systems that have been able to produce food more cheaply because they've not pursued the same level of animal welfare. It's a difficult sell to ask. So there's always going to be an issue there. But I think the cases in which that might be an issue are maybe more limited than some would think. I mean, in Britain we import quite a bit of poultry from Thailand, and chickens are native to Thailand. It's where they come from. So, and a lot of other countries have, if they have a more extensive agricultural system, that's usually good for animal welfare. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that it should be a barrier in all cases, but it is in some.
Yeah, I'm going to pass on to our two colleagues in 1 second, but Minister Timerman, it seems perhaps that didn't quite sit with your viewpoint on the
well, we understand the concern about animal welfare. In fact, we think it is much important to look at human beings' welfare. I understand that in certain countries, and this is not something I discovered, I think it was Mr. Wolfson when he was president of the World Bank a few decades ago, who said that it was impossible to live in a world where a cow gets more money than a human being in a third world country. The cows get paid more than human beings. So with that equation, it's impossible to find a solution to food security. And that is our main concern. Yeah. That is why we think that how can you have welfare in countries that you don't have human beings' welfare? Now, if welfare, animal welfare, cannot be a policy that is looks very humane, but in a sense leaves out many countries of the markets, of the most important markets in food, like the developed countries.
What's Victoria's and Australia's view on this, particularly when you have such a strong regulatory environment as well, which impacts this?
Well, I think the thing we haven't talked about in this debate so far is actually the consumers in quite a few of these countries, that consumers have expectations around food standards, around animal welfare, and whether it be the supermarket chains that market most of our produce now, or whether it be the consumers themselves, they are effectively self-regulating these sorts of standards. I think in some ways it's not necessarily government that's actually putting in place these standards. It is the expectations of the consumers and the people that are selling them the food, then making sure that that type of production system is actually used in whatever it is. So I think we do have some responsibilities to make sure we do have good animal welfare, for argument's sake, but ultimately it's the consumers that are deciding quite a few of those things.
And they'll vote with their wallet at the end of the day.
They most certainly will, whether it be people that decide they want organic production systems to buy their food from, whether it be people in the chicken and the egg industry that want free range versus barn or shedded production systems. It is ultimately the consumer that buys the food.
Yeah. And Minister Stewart, what's the likelihood of policymakers around the world coming together to tackle these big issues that, as our Minister from Argentina mentions, has a direct impact on people's lives in the developing world?
From our perspective, I don't think there are a lot of real, genuine differences of opinion. I think when it comes right down to it, nations will understand that responsibility is in order as far as issues like animal welfare go. I don't think that's something that we can't agree on, but too often we've seen nations use issues like animal welfare, GMOs, and the like as non-tariff trade barriers, and that's I think where we have to draw the line. We can have legitimate differences of opinion on fine issues like animal welfare, and we can work that out. But clearly, we're not going to meet our objectives to feed 9 billion people by the year 2050 if we let these items turn into non-tariff trade barriers that not only prevents the free flow of goods, but discourages the production of food around the world.
And Minister, what are the other obstacles, besides the trade perspective? What are the other obstacles to meet this, as Minister Eustice mentions, to prevent a Malthusian disaster of some sort by 2050, you know, with this population growth?
As I said, we have more than enough food to feed the whole world. The problem is distribution of that food, access to the market. I mean, people with money to buy food, because the food is there. The food is in the market. I think education is important. Technology transfer is important. You cannot compete if you don't know the techniques on how to produce food or anything else. Infrastructure. Argentina works with cooperation in many African countries. And the problem is not the land. The problem is not to teach on how to produce food. The problem is that once you produce the food, you need to bring the food to the market. You need to bring the food. If you don't have the roads, and if you don't have the whole system of distribution, it's impossible. So it is not only to know how to farm, but how do you get the credit? You need the credit. The only way to get credit is through the financial system. And the financial system doesn't work to encourage production. The financial system, like we have been seeing in the last few years, or in the last 10 or 15 years, think more about how to make money through financial instruments rather than to finance production activities. When I was a child, many years ago, the banks were at the service of the industrial sector. Now the industry is at the service of the banks. We have to revert that equation.
As a Conservative MP, do you agree with that?
Well, the only thing I would say, I think the commodity markets actually play a very important role around the world in helping companies manage risk. We've obviously got the big financial centre in London. There has been some allegations there's been a bit of sort of playing of the markets and price fixing goes on. But speculation itself is very much a way of helping companies manage risk, as they can buy and sell their produce on a forward basis, knowing their price. And given that commodity markets are notoriously volatile, and anyone producing has to live with that volatility, I think some of these financial instruments do actually have an important role to play in helping companies manage risk. So I'm less sceptical about the value of the commodities market, although I do absolutely accept, and this is particularly true in the UK, the capital cost to set up a farm these days, because of the sheer value and cost of land that you have to purchase and all of the plant and equipment that goes with it, the capital cost is very high, and it does act as a barrier to new businesses setting up. And a lot of existing businesses do find difficulty accessing capital from the banks. So I think there's a legitimate point there. But I'm less down, if you like, on the role of the commodity markets, because I think they have an important role to play.
It's always good to have a balance on the panel. Before we open things up to the floor to get some questions, we are here in the UAE. I'd love to get your input and your viewpoint on your relations with the UAE and how you'd like to see this moving forward, particularly on the topic that we're discussing. And I'll stay with you, Minister.
Well, look, the UAE is the UK's largest market in the Gulf area, so it's one that we take very seriously. It's why we've been coming to Gulfood, the exhibition here that we're all attending this week for many years. And we would like to develop it. We see this as an important market. We would like to develop it further and expand our exports here even more. As I said, they went up 14% last year, and we would like to continue to grow that export market.
Yeah. Minister Walsh, Australia, the big net exporter of agriculture. What's your view on the future with relations in the UAE in this field?
So Victoria's had a long-term relationship with the UAE, supplying grain and particularly red meat through either live export or through now chilled meat, and a developing dairy market as well. So we obviously have been at Gulf Foods for quite a few years. Previous government opened a trade office here in Dubai back in 1997. We are here for the long haul to have good relations, to be seen as a long-term reliable supplier of food to this market. And I really appreciate, I've been here, this is my second year coming here to Gulf Foods, and met quite a few people, and very much appreciate and understand the needs here, that people want to make sure they've got food long term.
Yeah.
And we want to continue to have that discussion and make sure we are seen as one of those preferred suppliers.
Yeah. And Minister Stewart?
My colleagues have spoken from a national perspective, and I speak from a provincial perspective. But even our province did $260 million worth of agricultural food trade with the UAE last year, and that makes the United Arab Emirates a very, very important customer to us, and a very important business partner, and we as well look to maintain and improve even our relations with United Arab Emirates, and with the objective of hoping to build on that pretty solid trade record in the future.
And Minister Timerman, I've been to Buenos Aires and I've enjoyed the steak. I hope you're going to send lots of steak over to us. But from a foreign policy perspective, and also from the
I was told that we have 3 or 4 good restaurants here.
Yes,
with
you
Argentine
have.
meat.
I've eaten in most
I
of
will
them.
recommend. I will recommend you. That's our biggest, way to show about Argentina is to look at our food. No, but really, in 2005, we came to this exhibition for the first time, and 3 companies were present from Argentina, 2005. This year, 60 Argentine companies are present today. And if we don't have more companies here, it's because we don't have enough room for them. So if you expand the exhibition, we will bring more companies. That is how we see our relationship with the Emirates. And it is something that the world is really more wide and bigger than what we used to think a few decades ago. Now, a few decades ago, there were few countries where Argentina was exporting our products. Today, there are more than 170. Why? Because globalization, connectivity, everything is helping countries that are far away from, like Argentina, to be able to do business with Emirates on a daily basis without thinking about the distance. We have a great relationship with Saudi Arabia, with countries all over the world that 10 years ago we didn't even have a diplomatic office or diplomatic relationship. So I think we are focusing more on these countries than on what was our old relationships, no? Because they are there, they know us, they know what to buy from us, we know what to buy from them, but here is the future. I mean, here in the Emirates, countries in Asia, in Africa, this is the future for countries like Argentina, and so we, from a strategic point of view, our relationship with the Emirates is one of them at the highest level of our foreign policy.
So very optimistic from countries and provinces on the panel. Does anyone have any questions? We're running a little bit over time, but if anyone has any questions, we'll take one. There we go, just this gentleman here, thank you.
My name is Nadeem Nahid. Thank you for this nice talk from the Excellencies. I have a question and I have a concern. Now, the food security and doubling the food production to feed the hungry people is a very noble. Now, do we have a safe measures to produce this kind of food for a real safe consumption? Because I mean, to double those production, to double the quantity of food now, it requires a lot of chemical products, how much are we going to do for this safety, which related to the human beings and to the planet? And one more question. What about those countries who are producing thousands of tons of food converted to energy? Thank you very much.
On the point of food safety, perhaps, Minister, you'd like to take that up, given your background in farming?
Yes, I think it's a perfectly good point and a valid question. And the answer is to make sure you get the regulation right. And we've always had regulation in these areas that have regulated the use of pesticides. It takes many, many years in the UK for a chemical company to bring forward a particular pesticide for approval. It has to be tested exhaustively over a number of years. And we have the same, in the European Union. We've been quite slow, actually, to adopt GM technology and other new technologies. But we do have quite a rigorous system in place now to test the safety of those products and to make sure they're not causing environmental damage either. So I think it's a good point, but I'm confident that in the UK and in Europe, we've actually got very, very robust systems in place to ensure the safety of these products so that we can have sustainable intensification of our agricultural production.
Does anyone else want to come in on that point, or will we just wrap things up there because we are running over on time?
Can I just make,
Yeah.
I actually think we've got even better testing regimes, and I think all the countries represented here would say they have than what we had 20 or 30 years ago. So we are increasing food production with new varieties, new production systems, but I think we're actually guaranteeing it's better quality and safer food than it was over that time as well.
Yeah.
I think both are being done in parallel.
And perhaps, Minister, on biofuels, given Latin America, I know it's more so in Brazil, but are you concerned about biofuels and the land being used to produce fuel rather than food? Is that something that keeps you up at night?
Well, the point is that we have been producing enough agricultural products to export and to produce biofuels. That is another way of having energy in the world. We have tried all the systems to have enough energy in our country and for our industry and our agro-business. We have nuclear energy, we have hydroelectric energy, we have oil energy, we have gas energy, and also biofuels that are quite good for the environment and are, we have enough land to produce the soybeans needed to produce biofuels. It's another alternative to energy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Please, Ministers, it was very interesting and insightful. We all very much appreciate it. If we could show our appreciation to the Ministers. Thank you very much.